Hi, welcome back. In this video, I'm gonna walk you through the entire drawing process of this hyper-realistic drawing of Michelangelo's sculpture. So let's get started. As always, these are the art supplies I'll be using for this drawing, and you can pause the video right here to note them down. I'm using this premium 350 GSM paper by Grupo Cordinos, which was imported from Belgium, and the drawing portion area is 13 x 18 inches. But the surface of this drawing paper is quite similar to ordinary chart paper or any other smooth surface drawing paper or Bristol pad, so you can use whichever is available. I drew the outline using grid method, and you can find the detailed step-by-step process from making the grid to outlining on my Patreon profile. Link is in the description. Now let's mask the edges of the drawing paper using a masking tape to prevent graphite from spilling over the borders. Okay, so let's start the shading process, and I'm firstly darkening the directional lines of the hair using my 8B pencil. I'm keeping the pressure very high on my pencil to achieve a darker outline. Keep on darkening all these hair clusters and make sure to maintain a very low angle on your pencil to achieve a dark yet smooth base, as this left side has shadow which is making it appear quite dark. So I'm also darkening the outline of the ear so that it doesn't fade away during the shading and blending process. Okay, so when you have successfully darkened the required hair clusters, it's time to add a base layer in the whole head portion. And for that, I'm using my 8B graphite powder with a bigger size draw brush and adding this layer using circular scribbling motion. If you don't have a graphite powder kit, you can make one at home by watching this video from the cards. And by the way, you can get access to our premium content and support this channel through Patreon. You can sign up through different membership levels and get access to all the outlines and grid references, etc. We have an ever-growing library of hundreds of exclusive and real-time tutorials. And you will also get access to 4 new tutorials every month. You can also post your artworks in our active community of patrons and participate in our weekly critique sessions where I give my honest and positive critiques on your artworks, so you can improve your skills and get better with your drawing. Visit the link in description and become a premium member today. I'm layering more powder over this left side as it is darker in the reference image. And for the right portion, I'm shifting towards my 6B graphite powder and layering it just like the way I did for the left side. Now to add some depth in the hair clusters, I'm using my medium-sized draw brush and layering 6B graphite powder. I'm also shading the left side of the head but using a bigger size draw brush this time to achieve a darker layer, just like the reference image. When we look at the drawing, we can see that the base is almost looking one-toned. So I'm layering graphite to create some more dimension to it. I'm using my 8B pencil and shading the required areas on the left side by keeping the angle very low, and then blending this layer using a medium-sized draw brush. Okay, so now I'm using an 8B graphite powder and carefully shading the areas in between the hair clusters. This left side is still looking a bit dull, so I'm going over it using an 8B pencil and layering the graphite until I achieve the required darkness. I'm thoroughly blending this layer using my draw brush just like the way I did earlier. Now here comes the interesting part, which is highlighting and detailing. And as we can see in the reference image that the head mostly has blurry highlights with softer edges. So I'm using Perfection Eraser, which is perfect fit to create this type of texture. Notice that I'm applying a lighter pressure in the start to create a required shape of the highlight, and then increasing the pressure to add some dimension to it. Also notice that I'm flicking my eraser to create a perfect blend of highlights with the surroundings to create the required texture. The left side of the head has very soft highlights, so I'm reducing the pressure and picking up the excess graphite in circular patterns of hair. Now moving on to the next hair cluster, and I'm carefully going in between the darker areas using the same Perfection Eraser. But as we move towards the right side, the highlights are becoming brighter. So I'm maintaining a higher pressure on my eraser. I'm reducing the pressure on my eraser in between to add softer highlights where required. And keep on repeating the similar process for the rest of the hair clusters in this portion. I haven't added the darker details in this right portion earlier, so I'm just adding highlights for now and then add the darker details later on. You don't have to follow the exact steps I'm doing here. You can add the darker details first as I did earlier. In this drawing, both methods will give the same results. So it's totally up to you whether you want to add highlights first or darker details. When the highlights in all the required portions are done, grab your 8B pencil and start adding these curved strokes right beside the brighter ones to mimic the curly hair clusters. And this dark and light contrast will immediately make the hair cluster look 3D and realistic. I'm maintaining high pressure for most of the parts to achieve the depth, and then using a flicking method with variable pressure to achieve blended soft ends where required. If we look at the reference image, we can see that this hair cluster has a prominent stone texture. So I'm adding these white dots by maintaining a very low angle. Low angle and variable pressure will help us in achieving a dot which is darker from the center and softer from the edges. Now, as the graphite pencil is still in my hand, I decided to shade the rest of the hair portion by following the similar method as I did earlier. You can always go back and adjust the details if you're not satisfied with the required texture. When you're done with the basic darker texture, you can start adding the background in this right portion. I'm using my 4B graphite powder with a bigger size dry brush for this purpose. Keep on layering the graphite onto the paper and use circular scribbling motions to avoid any harsh lines and strokes. Okay, so now let's blend some of the darker texture, and I'm using my small size blending stump. I'm going over the details with a very light pressure and using circular scribbling motions. And look how beautifully it has blended the graphite in its place without smudging or spilling it with the surrounding texture. Now it's time to add the highlights, and I'm using my Mono Zero Eraser as the hair cluster in the front are in focus, making the highlights appear sharp. I'm carefully going over the lighter areas and relating to the reference image every now and then to make sure I'm on the right track and adding the highlights correctly. And as you can see that these bright highlights made the cluster appear more round and 3D. Moving on to the right side, and I'm following the similar process of adding highlights and creating the texture using variable pressure. Now to create the flow of hair, I'm using sharp corner of my eraser and flicking it towards the right side in one go. This flicking method will create strokes without any blunt ends. Keep on adding a mixture of thin strokes and highlights depending upon the area you're working on. I'm also switching my eraser in between to create a variety of texture, just like the reference image. I'm following the similar process of adding a mixture of strokes and patterns using my Mono Zero Eraser on this whole right portion of the hair. And try not to add fine and smooth strokes, as we don't want hair cluster to look polished and smooth in this specific drawing. We want them to look rough, just like the reference image. Okay, so let's move on to the face portion, and when we look at the reference image, we can see that it has a porous stone texture. So I'm using stippling method and adding small dots and patterns all over the area where we have pitted texture. Take your time and add these dots very carefully and slowly to achieve the required results. As porous texture are naturally irregular, so avoid creating uniform dots and lines and keep them as random as you can. I'm applying higher pressure to create darker texture and then reducing it to create lighter ones. I'm increasing the distance between the dots while working on the lighter areas like these temples of the forehead. And while working on the portion near the eye, I'm reducing the distance and adding these dots close together to create a denser look. Keep on adding these dots of random sizes until this whole area is filled. Moving on to the eye, and when we look at the reference image, we can see that the dots here are of smaller size. So I'm adding them very carefully using my sharp round tip 8B pencil. Also notice that I'm layering some dots while working on the left side and then gradually increasing the distance as I move towards the right side. I'm also shading the area on the right side of the eye to add depth to it, just like the reference image. Continue adding these dots of random length and shape onto the lower eyelid as well. Moving on to the eyebrows, and I'm adding these small slant strokes by moving my hand back and forth while varying the pressure. You can also use the flicking method to achieve such results. I'm reducing the length of these strokes as I move towards the left side to mimic the natural flow of eyebrow hair. Okay, so now fill the whole eye portion with these small dots of random sizes and shapes, along with adding this light base layer for the shadowed portions. This will create a perfect 3D base, just like the reference image. To create proper contours of the face features, I'm going over some of the areas like the left side of the eye, iris and forehead portion to lay the graphite over them. Now let's move on to the next portion, and as we can see in the reference image that this ear portion is quite dark. So I'm filling this portion thoroughly using my 8B graphite powder with a bigger size dry brush. Blend this layer thoroughly by moving your hand in circular motions and see how smooth it has started to look. Now it's time to lay the graphite over the ear portion to create depth, and I'm using my 8B pencil. And I'm using variable pressure and low angle while shading this area to achieve a 3D base. I'm also adding the small dots texture on the earlobe by following the same technique I used earlier. Now to create a smooth finish, I'm blending this layer using my bigger size dry brush. Okay, so let's blend the base layer on the forehead, and as we can see it has some intricate details, so I'm using my medium sized dry brush so that we can blend the targeted areas carefully and precisely without affecting the surrounding areas. The background along the outline is looking a bit dull, so I'm layering graphite over all the dull areas using medium sized dry brush. Now let's blend this layer using a bigger size dry brush in circular motions to avoid patchiness. I'm switching towards my medium sized dry brush and blending this area as we have already shaded the forehead portion. This front portion has a blurry hair cluster peeking through, so I'm firstly drawing this shape using a perfection eraser and then fine tuning it using my sharp tip mono 0 eraser. To create a perfect softer edge, I'm going along the left side of this stroke using a perfection eraser, and it will give a softer look to hair clusters, just like the way we needed here. Okay, so now let's start the highlighting process, and as always, I'm using my perfection eraser for the softer highlights. I'm adding these small dots and strokes in between the darker texture very carefully. Now as we move towards the left side, the texture here is becoming more detailed and focused, so I'm shifting towards the mono 0 eraser. I'm adding a few of these lines and strokes over and in between the perfection eraser highlights to make them pop up even more. Now as we move towards the left side, I'm adding more strokes, since we don't have a base of the highlights like we had for the right portion. Notice that I'm applying light pressure on my eraser while working on the areas which appear darker in the reference image, and then increasing the pressure on my eraser to add brighter highlights. And don't forget to change the direction of these strokes depending upon the area you are working on. You can keep the reference image in front of you in either soft or hard form and keep on relating to it to replicate the details and highlights easily. I'm switching my mono 0 eraser with a perfection eraser for the areas which need softer highlights. As we move towards the eyebrows, we can see that the texture here is a bit in the form of dots and thick strokes. So I'm applying higher pressure and moving my hand in small back and forth motions very slowly to create such an effect. I'm going back and forth with my tools and adjusting the details where required until I achieve the desired results. Moving on to the eye, and when we look at the reference image, we can see that some areas have brighter and sharp highlights, while some of them have softer and blended highlights. So to incorporate both types of texture, I'm firstly using a perfection eraser for the center portion of the upper eyelid. When the base highlights in this small portion are done, it's time to add brighter ones, and as always, I'm using my mono 0 eraser. I'm going over some of the previous highlights and then moving towards the right side and adding new ones as well. This overlapping of softer and brighter highlights will create a perfect 3D texture. The right portion has softer highlights, so I'm shifting towards my perfection eraser and adding slant lines. I'm repeating the similar process and adding small dots and strokes of random length after analyzing the reference image. And make sure to clean the tip of your perfection eraser more frequently to increase its effectiveness. Moving on to the detailing of the sclera, and it is looking a bit patchy from the corners. So I'm blending the graphite using my medium sized brush very carefully. Some of the darker tones are also looking dull, so I'm adjusting them using my 8B pencil. Now it's time to add brighter details, and I'm using my flat tip mono 0 eraser. I'm adding these intricate dots and strokes in between the darker texture we have added earlier. I'm adding denser highlights while working on the right side of the sclera, as light is hitting this part, making it appear brighter, and then gradually increase the distance between these strokes as left side is shadowed and dark. I'm also lightening the lower lid and adding these curved strokes very carefully. Keep on adding small dots of random sizes for the lower lid as well. Okay, so moving on to the left side of the forehead, and the darker texture we have added earlier is looking too defined and sharp. So I'm using my clean tip blending stump and going over all these dots to lightly blend their edges with the surrounding. I'm also adding some missing darker details and blending them afterwards like I did previously. Now to make it more realistic, I'm adding these small strokes right beside the darker ones using my perfection eraser, and then topping some of the highlights with brighter details using mono zero eraser. Moving on to the face portion, and first of all let's add a base layer, and I'm using my 4B graphite powder for this purpose. I'm layering it over the nose first using my medium sized toy brush to create a 3D base. Notice that I'm layering more powder over the areas which are darker. For blending over the larger areas, I'm switching towards the bigger size brush to speed up the process. And after blending, the contours of the nose are looking a bit dull. So I'm layering more powder over them to achieve the desired darkness. Now blend the excessive graphite over the surrounding areas to add a light base layer. Make sure to use circular scribbling motions while blending the graphite to avoid patchiness. Moving on to the jawline and cheek portion, and I'm repeating the similar process of creating a 3D base by layering more powder over the darker areas. I'm using a bigger size draw brush and gradually building the intensity until the required darkness is achieved. For the lips, I'm switching my bigger brush with a medium one, as it is easier to go into all the nooks and corners. Keep on filling the areas by layering more graphite until the full face portion is done. Okay, so when the base layer is done, let's move on to the texturing process. And I'm using my 8B pencil and following the similar method of adding small dots and strokes of random sizes as I did earlier for the forehead portion. And as we move towards the eye, the texture has started to become slightly smaller in size. So I'm adding a small dot first and extending it slightly above and below to create the required textures of pores and grooves. Keep on adding this texture very carefully after analyzing the portion from the reference image. When we look at the reference image, we can see that the texture on the left side is relatively bigger in size as compared to the right side. So I'm adding these bigger sized dots and patches by keeping the pressure high on my pencil. I'm also extending these dots in their respective directions as this will give the cheekbone its form and shape. Make sure to extend them in right direction as wrong strokes can also result in deformity. Keep on repeating the similar process of adding small dots of random sizes and extend them in respective directions. But make sure to change the length and direction according to the area you are working on. And as we move towards this area below the cheekbone, the texture becomes slightly bigger in size and more random. So I'm adding it accordingly. The area under the ear on the left side is missing the darker base, so I'm adding it using the same 8B pencil. I'm keeping the pressure high while working on the left side and gradually decreasing it as I move towards the right to achieve perfect gradient look. Now continue adding the darker texture by following the similar process as we did earlier. Notice that for the jawline area, I'm increasing the distance between these textural dots and strokes to achieve the required shiny effect. And don't forget to change the direction of these dots and strokes depending upon the area you're working on. I'm repeating the similar process for the rest of the cheeks portion as well. As we move towards the lips, we can see that the texture here is different from the rest of the face. So I'm adding these curved vertical strokes under the lower lip. I'm flicking my pencil and adding these strokes side by side to achieve denser texture. And this will create the required shadowed look. Notice that I'm also shading the required portion in between the texturing to achieve the darker base. For the sides of the nostrils, I'm reducing the size of these dots and adding them close together to create a denser look. Keep on repeating the similar process and add this texture until all black portions are filled. Okay, so when the whole area is filled, it's time to soften the edges of these textural dots. And I'm firstly scraping my 2H pencil over the sandpaper and creating a round tip, just like this. And now going around these prominent dots which we have added earlier with a very light hand. But this isn't turning out as dark as I wanted. So I'm switching towards my B pencil with a similar round tip and going around the texture. This will add the required dark texture around the dots, making them appear more detailed. I'm repeating the similar process of going around the dots with a very low angle for the nose as well. You can also overlap the dots and shadows to blend them naturally. Keep on layering the graphite using the same B pencil for the neck portion as well. As the darker texture is almost done, so it's time to blend the jawline, and I'm using my blending stump and going over the area. I'm using back and forth motions in the direction of the texture to create a smooth look. Don't overdo this layer as it will make the whole area look smudged instead of soft. This will soften the edges of the darker texture along with adding a subtle base to the required area. I'm also going in this center portion of the cheek and blending it using the same blending stump. But it has started to look dull, so I'm firstly going over the area using my B pencil and moving my hand in back and forth motion. Make sure to use the light pressure as we don't want the layer to look patchy. This layer is not turning out as dark as I wanted, so I'm now shifting towards my 6B pencil and layering the graphite. I'm carefully building up the depth layer by layer in all the portions that seem a bit dull. If your drawing is looking just fine or as dark as the reference image, then you can skip this step. This center portion of the cheek needs a bit more blending, so I'm going over this portion and blending it using a blending stump. Now to give this whole texture a more cohesive look, I'm going over the whole face portion and blending the graphite using a bigger sized draw brush. Make sure to use lighter pressure and keep moving your hand in circular motions to avoid patchiness. Okay, so let's start the highlighting process, and as always, I'm using my perfection eraser first to add the softer highlights. I'm going along this hair cluster and adjusting its shape a bit to match it with the reference image. Now for the texture on the face, I'm adding these small lines and strokes in between the darker texture we have added earlier. I'm keeping the pressure low on my pencil and moving my hand back and forth to mimic a stone-like texture. As we move towards the nose, I'm increasing the distance between the lines to match it with the reference image. Now to top off these softer highlights, I'm using my Mono 0 eraser and adding these brighter strokes very carefully. The edge of the nose has a very bright highlight, so I'm adding this stroke by going along the outline and then creating a gradient towards the left side by varying the pressure on it. The lower right portion of the nose has a very detailed texture. So first of all, I'm creating a base of softer highlights using my perfection eraser. I'm going in between the darker texture and adding these intricate highlights. Now let's make them more shiny, and for that I'm using my flat tip Mono 0 eraser and adding small strokes over and in between the previous ones. Make sure to clean the tip of your eraser more frequently to remove the graphite deposit and increase its effectiveness. The rest of the nose has very sharp and defined highlights, so I'm directly adding these small strokes using my Mono 0 eraser. Okay, so now moving on to the face portion, and I'm repeating the similar process of adding the softer highlights first using a perfection eraser. I'm carefully going over all the areas which are lighter in the reference image. I'm also adding small dots and reducing the length of the strokes where required. Notice that I'm keeping the pressure variable on my eraser. I'm applying higher pressure for the areas which need brighter highlights and then decreasing it for the softer ones. The softer and brighter tones of highlights create a perfect hyper-realistic texture just like the reference image. This shadowed portion on the cheek has very subtle highlights. So I'm applying very less pressure on my eraser and just adding some dimension to the darker texture. Okay, so now let's add some shine to the highlights, and I'm adding another layer of brighter highlights using my Mono 0 eraser. I'm going along the outline of the nose and adding these small strokes over and in between the previous highlights. And look how these small details made the nose look hyper realistic in just a few seconds. Few areas are looking too sharp to me, so I'm lightly dabbing my kneaded eraser over them to make them a bit subtle. Coming back to the highlighting process, and I'm repeating the similar process of adding small intricate strokes right above the previous highlights. This will make the previous highlights more shiny and bright. And make sure to clean the tip of your eraser after every 4 or 5 strokes to remove the graphite buildup. As we can see in the reference image that the light is falling on the face from the front side, which is making the sides appear dark and shadowed. So this left side of the drawing has very soft and subtle highlights, and for that I'll be using my kneaded eraser. I have kneaded my eraser into a round shape and now tapping it over the areas where I need highlights. For the neck portion, I have kneaded the eraser into a thin disc and now moving my hand in back and forth motions to add highlights. It will effectively pick up the excessive graphite and leave us with very soft and subtle texture, just like the way we want it here. As we know that the texture of kneaded eraser is sticky, so make sure to use a very light pressure while following these back and forth motions to prevent it from sticking to the paper. I'm also using tapping motions to add the softer highlights where required. Now moving on to the jawline, and I'm repeating the similar process of adding highlights using both tapping and back and forth motions respectively. I was not satisfied with how the highlights turned out, so I'm going over the jawline using this bigger size dry brush and now adding the required texture using a perfection eraser. I'm adding these small slant lines in the direction of the darker ones to make them pop up even more. Now let's shade the background, and I'm using my 4B graphite powder with a bigger size dry brush. I'm following the similar layering process as I did for the upper background portion. Keep layering the graphite until you achieve the desired depth. If you look at the top lips, we can see that it has very small bright highlights and is irregular. So I'm adding these random highlights using the same mono zero eraser. Make sure to use sharp tip to achieve such intricate details. And keep on adding these highlights over the whole lip portion. I'm rotating my eraser and using the sharp edge to add these small strokes until all sharp ends are used. For the rest of the lips and chin portion, I'm following the similar process and adding these strokes in between the darker ones. This lower portion of the chin and neck has subtle highlights, so I'm switching my eraser and using a perfection eraser. For the small visible portion of the shoulder, I'm firstly going along the outline and picking up the excess graphite, and then using a bigger size dry brush to lightly shade the lower portion, and this will add the required depth to it. And with this last step, we are done with this hyper-realistic Michelangelo statue drawing. Creating these free tutorials needs a significant amount of time and energy. So if you found this one valuable, please show your support by liking this video. Your support keeps me inspired to bring you more creative content. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.